Okay. I'm not sure who's going to join us. Some people join us a little late. I'm telling also the people who may be watching this that, I'm going to be looking for a few more participants so that we can get the numbers up. I've had the numbers up to like 8 or 9, and then they kind of drop down again. And I have a very bad feeling about Guido. We haven't seen him in a few weeks. His Facebook has gone a little dead. I should really check that out a bit more. And he wasn't doing too well the last time we saw him. And you and he, the two of you were always the most eager, or the ones that I could count on to talk to. So your participation is greatly appreciated. I have this inability to talk to a blank screen or talk to my own image on a screen. When I know people are listening, it's a different matter. Um, Something that I talked about last week. I'm just going to share the screen with this. It's I came across this in a book called Gurdjieff Reconsidered by Roger Lipsey, and whoops, and it's called this. I call it now. I'm calling it the student's vow. Um, So for an aspirant, for a student on the path, a student following the fourth way, uh, this was something that Mr. Gurdjieff gave to one of his French students during the Second World War. And I think it helps to clarify a lot about these teachings. The fact that we are not doing these teachings for ourselves. That even if we are a mechanical human being, even if we are just an automaton, we are still serving a cosmic purpose. But when we begin to grow our being, when we begin to refine higher energies, we serve a higher purpose. And pondering this for a number of years, Mr. Gurdjieff was very concerned about inner exercises. I think he was concerned that they could lead to the development of what he called a hasnamus. So someone who grows their being and then uses it to enhance their own personal power. If you can develop what Mr. Gurdjieff called a Kesdjan body, right now most people have sort of a Kesdjan body developing in them. But if you fully develop it, one of the products of the Kesdjan body, he said it was Anbladzuin, which he described as the blood of the Kesdjan body. And it's not easy to develop this. It takes a bit of work. But if you develop the Kesdjan body, the Anbladzuin, the blood of the Kesdjan body, so to speak, according to the way Mr. Gurdjieff explained it, has a somewhat hypnotic quality. So if you develop the Kesdjan body, you will have a hypnotic quality on other people. You will be able to lead them in the right direction, or you will be able to lead them astray. And so it's very important to temper this. And, this vow, and I'm calling it the student's vow, I put that title on it. It was just 2 paragraphs in the book, Gurdjieff Reconsidered by Roger Lipsey. And so the vow that Mr. Gurdjieff told his French students to say during the Second World War, when they were under Nazi occupation, so it was a real brutal time, with the sociopathic military government, so to speak, in charge of Paris, where they were all living. And so the vow is, I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. And I believe, by turning this into a vow, into something that we say within ourselves as a vow, that there is sort of a little bit of a magical quality to making a vow. When we honestly and truly make a vow, particularly with our whole being, with what he called our common presence, with the awareness of our head brain, the sensation of our body brain, and an awareness of our feeling brain. So when we did it with all three brains, and we do it with a certain intensity, and we do it with a certain awareness that this is a sacred vow that we are making, by turning it into a vow, by repeating this as a vow, we are sort of locking it into ourselves. So those of you who will be listening on YouTube, those of you who are listening on Facebook right now, just repeat it after me. I wish to be. I can be. And try to say this with a full awareness of your three brains present here in the moment, as much as you can be. Aware of your breathing, aware of your body, aware of these images on the screen, aware of your feelings. And I'll start again. Try to bring that awareness to this. I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. And then really try to lock this in. Try to self-remember. Try to become as aware of yourself as possible in this moment, and finish with, this is understood to be a vow. Now, I should also say that, there's concern about esoteric teaching seeping out into the world. I think that there are two issues at play here. One is that inner exercises get taught in the wrong fashion. Sort of like that game children play, where one whispers into the ear, who whispers into the next ear, who whispers into the next ear. And by the time the message returns to the original sender, it's all garbled. So if I told an inner exercise to someone, and they told an inner exercise to someone, and they told an inner exercise to someone, we'd kind of be at a loss for it. I remember years ago, I was in a Gurdjieff Bennett group, which is really more of a Bennett group than a Gurdjieff group. I was the Gurdjieffian in that group who kept on trying to bring it back to Mr. Gurdjieff. But there was a decision exercise, and he had never really explained the decision exercise in a proper way. And at one point I said, what is the decision exercise? And then he told me to write down what I thought it was based on my understandings of what he was saying in that group. And I came up with a different version than the one that he thought he was teaching. So to have it written down, to put things on YouTube in a very specific way, prevents that drift from happening. So that's one of the aims that I'm doing in terms of putting these exercises on YouTube. I believe it's very important that people who are interested in the teachings, who do not have the ability to join a group, perhaps they're not living in a place where there's a group or perhaps there's some kind of conflict with the ideology or the impetus or the direction of the group, I think it's very important that people who are interested in these teachings can begin to practice the inner exercises. Something that I've said before, that the right inner exercises and the wrong teachings are better than the right teachings and the wrong inner exercises. It's because of the inner work that we grow. And then the other thing is, when we look around the world, we see so many manipulative people. We see people who have learned to use sleight of mouth techniques, hypnotic techniques in daily language. We see the whole way that, commercials within television have evolved, the whole attempt to market things and sell things, and the sort of the rise of the salesperson in the last 100 years. And, all those fears of people abusing things, it's already happening in the world around us. There are so many people out there who are peddling darkness, who are peddling conspiracy theories that they know are not true, and the gullible people are accepting them. And the nature of the head brain to believe any old thing, we are actually living in fairly scary times in terms of, how gullible people are. They believe that the earth is flat. They believe that there was a basement of a pizza shop where there was a pedophile ring that involved Hillary Clinton and all the Democrats, and just nonsense. They believe that there are certain people out there who are reptilian and reptiles, and so we already live in that world. We live in a very manipulative world, and it's through practicing these techniques, practicing these inner exercises, that we begin to grow. I've been talking about bringing up another, so to speak, inner exercise. This is something we've done, but in a different way. And I'm just going to bring up the text now and read this text. This is from C.S. Nott's book, C.S. Nott, The Teachings of Gurdjieff, A Pupil's Journey. Only the involving part can vivify the eye. And he's talking about food here. So anything that doesn't rise up will rise down. In reply to a question about the second food, air, Gurdjieff said, there are two parts to air: evolving and involving. So rising and falling, the octave moving up or the octave moving down. Only the involving part can vivify the eye. At present, this involving part serves only for general cosmic purposes. Only when you shall have in you yourselves a conscious wish will you be able to assimilate this for you good part of air, which comes from the prime source. In order to be able to assimilate the involving part of air, you should realize your own significance, or, an aside, your own insignificance. And the significance, another aside, the insignificance of those around you. You are mortal. You are mortal. Someday you will die. He on whom your attention rests is your neighbor. He will also die. Both of you are non-entities. At present, most of your suffering is suffering in vain. It comes from feelings of anger, jealousy, and resentment towards others. If you acquire data always to realize the inevitability of your death, of their death and your own death, you will have a feeling of pity for others and be just towards them. since their manifestations which displease you are only because you or someone has stepped on their corns, or because have stepped on their corns. Oops. Have stepped on their corns, or because your own corns are sensitive. And corns are bunions. They used to have very ill-fitting shoes, and when you have ill-fitting shoes, you develop bunions on your feet that are very sensitive, and someone steps on your feet, it really hurts. At present, you cannot see this. Try to put yourself in the position of others. They have the same significance as you. They suffer as you do, and like you, they will die. Only if you always try to sense this significance until it becomes a habit, whenever your attention rests on anyone, only then will you be able to assimilate the good part of air and have a real eye. Every man has wants and desires which are dear to him and which he will lose at death. From realizing the significance of your neighbor when your attention rests on him, that he will die, pity for him and compassion towards him will arise in you, and finally you will love him also. And finally you will love him also. By doing this constantly, real faith, conscious faith, will arise in some part of you and spread to other parts. And you will have the possibility of knowing real happiness, because from this faith, objective hope will arise. Hope of a basis for continuation. So I just want to go back and unpack a little part of it. In the first bit, he said there are two parts of air, evolving and involving. So as we breathe in, there's an aspect of air that can help us move up, that where we grow the octave of air. And there's another part of the air, another way the air that we breathe in can also devolve. So we can go up with an ascending octave or a descending octave. And he says that the proper use, at least he seems to be saying here, that the proper use of the descending part of air is to vivify our eye. And we do this through the development of pity. Normally when air devolves, it comes in at a certain level, and as it devolves, we begin to sort of move down, and we move down into the dark regions of anger, the dark negative emotions. So instead of being consumed by anger or jealousy or hatred or fear or terror, if we can transform this level, these feelings, into pity for our fellow human being. So instead of allowing the natural devolution of air into the real negative, hostile, egocentric, egotistical emotions, if we use this downward movement of air to invoke a feeling of pity in us for other people. It's just telling me the OBS, I'm not sure, hopefully we're still online. Okay, I'm hoping I'm still online with what's going on. It just said my connection was unstable. Hopefully we're still, I'm just trying to determine if I'm, I think Karen's joining us. Okay. I hope I'm live. This seems to be. We'll see. So, I guess Karen, or it's not my dog barking. Karen seems to have joined us, but we can't see her. So, doing the breathing exercises, and we will do a breathing exercise. And I will play a little inner exercise that I've done for breathing. Helps the evolving part of air. It helps us to grow the octave of air upwards. But as things move up, things also move down. If you look and study the food diagrams, you don't realize it, because the food diagrams are only, and I've got a picture of the food diagram, I'll pull it up. So the food diagrams only show the upward movement. And here is the octave of air. And in the middle, let me see, anode, draw. Here in the middle, whoops, I don't know what happened there. Here, my mouse kind of goes a little crazy at times. Here in the middle is the evolved and the evolving, the fully evolved octave of air. So when we do the breathing exercises to extract the higher particles and the active elements in air, we're leading to an upward movement. But everything that goes up also goes down. And so this can also go down. A metaphor that I've come up with is, you see a beach with golden sand, and you take out a pan and you use water and you begin to separate the gold from the sand. And you end up with two piles, a pile of gold and a pile of sand. Unfortunately, the metaphor falls slightly apart because gold is heavier than sand, so it sinks down. But every time energy is refined upwards, it's also refined downwards. This is the nature of the alchemical process. So you have gold and sand, and you end up with a pile of gold and a pile of sand. You eat an apple, and part of the apple is refined upwards, and then part of the apple is refined downwards. So there is the involving part of air and the evolving part. The involving part of air, I believe, leads to the darker, heavier, denser emotions. Pity, in a sense, we can think of that as a darker, heavier emotion. So here, the person that our attention rests on, to become aware that someday, to become aware that you will die, to become aware that they will die, to become aware, and right in the middle here, that both of you are, let me see if I still have this, both of you are non-entities. So, we are all puffed up by our ego and our sense of self-importance. And at present, our suffering is suffering in vain. And this goes back to what Karen asked me last week about the nature of suffering and, the difference between suffering and objective suffering. And what does objective suffering mean? Objective suffering is not the suffering and pain. It's the conscious awareness of ourselves suffering, whereas the suffering in vain is the suffering of the ego. Oh, why don't they recognize how good I am? Why don't they recognize how important I am? Why don't they? And it's all based on ego. Or, the anger of the ego. How can they do that to me? So normal feelings of anger, jealousy, and resentment towards others. This is the selfish, suffering in vain, because we suffer from our anger. We suffer from our jealousy and from our resentment. But it's all beneath and at the basis, all connected to our ego. So it's all suffering in vain. When we begin to realize that we ourselves are going to die, and that the person that we see in front of us is going to die, when we have the recognition of the inevitability of their own death and our own death, a pity or a feeling of pity will arise for them. And here, since they're manifestations which displease you. So for those of you who are more serious students of the Gurdjieff teachings, you're aware that he said one of the most important things we can learn to do in his wonderful use of language is to withstand the displeasing manifestations of another towards ourselves. So when someone yells at us, rather than get defensive, rather than get upset, rather than yell back, rather than be wounded and have our ego wounded, to learn to just take it properly, with compassion, with wisdom, with awareness, and not react. So he's talking about the displeasing manifestations of others towards ourselves. I'm going to go back to my mouse. And all these lines now are moving. Let me just try and, sorry, I've never done all of this before. Okay, I'm going to just stop that sharing and reshare, and maybe I won't underline all of the things again. Do I have a way of just it's text? Let's see this. No. Mouse. There. So at present, and most of our suffering is suffering in vain. Very definitely suffering in vain. So the difference between conscious suffering, objective suffering, and suffering in vain is really the involvement of the ego, the subjectivizing principle. Me, my, mine, what's in it for me? Within psychology, they actually talk about the difference between pain and suffering. And they're using these terms in a different way. Right now, where I live, it's very dry. The air is very dry this time of year, so there's a lot of static electricity. And you reach for certain door handles, and when your skin makes contact with the door handles, you get a jolt of electricity. That's what is, in psychological terms, definition is considered pain. Here in the psychological definition, suffering is you walk over to the door handle kind of shaking in anticipation of getting the shock. You don't want to get the shock. In a Gurdjieffian sense, that is a personal suffering. It's subjective suffering. It's egocentric suffering. The objective suffering is to just touch the door handle and take the shock without the fear, and this is going to hurt me, and the concerns about it. And that fear, that oh my God, it's going to hurt me, I'm going to get zapped, he calls that suffering in vain. It doesn't lead to the development, to the growth of our being. It doesn't lead to the revivifying of our I, or the vivifying of our I, to grow our higher being body, which is higher than the Kesdjan body. So suffering, whenever we get angry, it's because we're suffering. Jealousy, resentment, there's a degree of suffering involved, but they're egocentric. forms of suffering. Whereas to objectively suffer is to put yourself in a situation where you don't feel those feelings towards yourself or self-pity. Self-pity is a form of subjective egocentric suffering. So when he's talking about pity here, he's talking about the use of pity for others in an objective sense. Instead of, oh, that poor dear, he's going to die. Oh, my heart goes out for him. As a, you've met people who are like that. It's more of an objective awareness that I'm going to die. He's going to die. Unless I do something, my life will be lived in vain. It will just be pouring from the empty to the void, to use another expression of Mr. Gurdjieff. It will not have any real, foundation, because it will all be based on the ego and me and my, and oh, they hurt me, and that upsets me, and how can they do that, and all of those egocentric emotions. So he goes, if you acquire the data always to realize the inevitability of their death and your own death, you will have a feeling of pity for others and be just towards them, since their manifestations which displease you are only because you or someone has stepped on their corns, or because your own corns are sensitive. And as I mentioned earlier, ill-fitting shoes, what we call bunions now, were corns. And when he's talking about corns here, he's really referring to the ego. It's your ego is sensitive, or their ego is sensitive. And, at present, you cannot see this. Most people cannot see how caught up they are in their own ego. They are like the proverbial fish in water. They're unable to perceive the manifestations of their own ego. They've never really begun to try to develop a kind of objective sense of who they are, of what they are. So, and also in Mr. Gurdjieff's books, Beelzebub Tales to his grandson, of Beelzebub, who was thrown out of heaven because he thought that God was doing things wrong and that he could figure out a better way of doing them, and banished to the solar system here, almost like a fallen angel. In that book, there is we cannot go to a much higher level unless and until we are really able to put ourselves in the position of others. And so at present, you cannot see this. Try to put yourself in the position of others. So this is the Native American also walking a mile in someone else's moccasins. And another word for this is empathy. Empathy is to feel with another person. Sympathy is to be sympathetic to someone's plight. Empathy is to actually feel along with them, to feel their suffering, to feel their pain. And interesting as an aside, sociopaths and psychopaths are unable to feel empathy. They are unable to put themselves into the suffering of another person and feel that other person's suffering. So this is why they can harm other people, and they don't care. They are unable to feel that. It's as if, not as if, they are lacking this ability. And this is one of the most important abilities that we need to develop. And this leads back into the vow in some ways, because when we begin to grow our being, in a sense, we are growing the ability to be more empathetic with other people. We are not growing ourselves to be more manipulative, to be more controlling. We are growing ourselves, and one of the ways that we grow ourselves is to enter into the reality of other people, to see that our suffering is in vain, their suffering is in vain. The anger they may direct towards us, the hatred, the jealousy, the fear, based on their ego, coming from their ego, means that they are non-entities, and we ourselves are non-entities until we develop ourselves at this level and to put ourselves into their position, to suffer with them, to develop the pity, objective pity for them, will also make us realize that our own vanity, our own ego, our own, how can they do that to me, anger, or they're frightening me, and me, the egotistical, subjective suffering that we normally spend most of our lives in is really in vain. So let me go down a bit further. So this also brings us to something else. At the very end of Beelzebub Tales, Mr. Gurdjieff said that if he could do anything, it would be to implant an organ within us that made us aware of our own death. So to recognize that we are mortal beings and that we will die. He actually goes into this quite a bit. He says that most people can have a fairly easy time imagining other people dying, but it's something that they have real problem doing with themselves. And they project their death off into the future. You know, I'm a North American and I'm a male and we live on an average of 76, 77 years. So I have so many years ahead of me. When the truth is I could walk out on the street, slip on some ice, be hit by a car, all sorts of things could happen. And we do not know the hour of our death. Sort of like that rich man in the Bible, building silos to store all of his grain and his riches, and then the angel of death visits him that night. To have this ever-present awareness that we are mortal beings, that we will die, our bodies will die, to have this understanding of the reality of our own death will make this moment and every moment we are alive more important. So this awareness of our death, this awareness of the fact that everyone that we know will die. No one will escape death. In 110, 120 years from now, all of humanity will have been replaced by another crew or group of humanity. Every single person alive today will be dead. The kings, the presidents, the people that we look up to, the power-possessing beings, the workers, the servants, everyone. No one escapes this. And to realize the inevitability of our own death is a very, very important thing that we can become aware of, and to become aware of the inevitability of the people around us. I'm going to die. They're going to die. Their anger is anger in vain. It's suffering in vain. Their anger towards me, their hatred towards me, their fear towards me, their treatment of me comes from their ego. And it's all, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And it's pouring from the empty to the void. Only conscious suffering has value. And that's objective, non-egocentric suffering. So this pity is actually a form of objective suffering, as opposed to the egocentric me, oh, I'm hurt, I'm in pain, I'm suffering, variety of suffering. So from realizing the significance of your neighbor, when your attention rests on him, that he will die, pity for him and compassion towards him will arise in you. And finally, you will love him. Also, by doing this constantly, real faith, conscious faith, will arise in some part of you and spread to other parts. This is another quality, the difference between objective faith and subjective faith. There's a huge gap. And most people, their faith is just a habitual belief. It's not really grounded in reality. When we develop that objective awareness, when we develop that objective side of ourselves, we develop objective, or another word for that is conscious faith. And then he says we will have the possibility of knowing real happiness because from this faith, objective hope will arise. Hope of a basis for continuation. And I won't be able to quote it properly, but Mr. Gurdjieff, some of his famous sayings are love of, he's talking about the love of of ourself in world 24, hope, faith in those regions. And as we rise up to the level of world 24, then when we move up to the level of world 12, these all change. Let me see if I can quickly bring this up. I wasn't intending to. If I can, they should be fairly close to the beginning. If I can, I don't think I can. Objective faith, for those of you who are students of these teachings, let me see if I can do this another way. I've got so many things on my, so somewhere in these I will have them. Any questions so far, Ian or Karen? Extra large.
I want to apologize for being late. It's not daylight saving time here.
Okay.
So your meeting began at 8:30 here, and I was so sorry to say I was still asleep, but I'm here now, and I'm grateful that my Zoom contract is working.
Okay. Just let me stop that sharing and go to this share. So conscious faith is freedom. Emotional faith is slavery. Mechanical faith is foolishness. Hope when bold is strength. Hope with doubt is cowardice. Hope with fear is weakness. These are the three different levels of man. The lowest one is world 48, when we're mechanical beings. The middle one is world 24, the mindful realm, the realm of personal consciousness. And the highest one is the objective realm. So by saying that to C.S. Knott, he's alluding to both of these. Conscious faith is freedom. Emotional faith is slavery. Mechanical faith is foolishness. So the man-machine, the faith of the man-machine is foolishness. The faith of the self-reflective, personally conscious person is slavery. Only when we develop the real I, only when we develop that level of awakening do we experience conscious faith. So let me just come back and just finish this. So here, real faith, conscious faith will arise in you, and hope as a basis for continuation. So actually I've pretty well done it. Let me just stop sharing and come back to the screen. So this development, this awareness of our own death, the awareness of our own mortality, the awareness that everyone whose eyes we rest on will die, particularly the awareness of people who displease us, who get angry at us, who get upset at us, who yell at us, who step on our corns, which is they inflame our ego. rather than reacting egocentrically, and how can they say that to me, and who are they to do this, and the normal common ways, is to develop an objective sense of pity, to use the descending, the involving, as opposed to the evolving and the ascending parts of air to help to vivify our eye. Any questions on this?
I'm, I'm not sure if this is me sort of philosophizing or, just getting caught up in details, but there's a little confusion around this exercise of sort of imagining people dying, or it's it's a mental faculty. You're like, oh, this person's going to die. You're reminding yourself it's this thing that you're holding. And the involving part of air, which seems very physical, chemical.
Yeah.
I'm not understanding the link between the two, and maybe it's you do one and the other one happens, but
yeah. Everything potentially evolves up, but it also potentially evolves down. We eat the apple, and a part of the apple goes into the mouth, the digestive system, various things, and it gets transformed up and transformed up and transformed up. But at each level where it's transformed up, the higher and the lower that are contained within that initial element are separated. So every time gold is refined up, sand is refined down. Or every time something is refined, something is coarsened. So every time we breathe, part of it moves up and part of it moves down. And the octave of air is connected to the emotional center. So the octave of air is connected to our emotions. And we can become aware that, when we feel love and when we feel joy and happiness, we feel lighter. When the opposite of love is anger, when we feel angry, and the opposite of joy is despair and sadness and terror and fear. If we start to pay attention within ourselves, we feel heavier. So there are emotions that we can talk about that are lighter than their opposites, the polarity of emotions. So love is lighter than anger. Peace is lighter than fear. Joy is lighter than despair. So within the octave of air, within the emotions, there is an evolution to emotions, and there's also the potential for a devolution of emotions. So a lightening of our feelings and darkening of our feelings. And this process naturally occurs. You eat the apple, some of it's refined upwards, and some of it we end up flushing down the toilet. And at every step in the alchemical process, when the higher blends with the lower, it meets in the middle. So the higher blending with the lower transforms something up. But at the same point, something is transformed down. I know I've got something that can explain this slightly differently. Let me share this. So, the second rule, the first rule is that the higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. Mr. Gurdjieff said that whatever produces light also produces dark. So, the farmer, the wind, the harvest, separating the wheat from the chaff. So in every alchemical process, that when the higher blends with the lower and creates one result, it also creates the opposite result. So the apple, meeting with the saliva and the grinding of the teeth, something is transformed up, and then something is transformed down and eventually into excrement. So within every alchemical process where there is refinement, there is also a coarsening. And this occurs with the octave of air. He's talking about something very esoteric here, that, normally when the octave of air devolves, we get jealous and we get angry and we get fearful and, we get filled with self-pity. But he's talking about transforming these, at least to my understanding, he's talking about transforming this devolutionary process. So to take the pity that is pity, when we think of pity, oh my God, that poor person, or, oh, our pity parties that we often have. I can't believe how bad my life is, and that person did this to me. And I love the term pity party. And a lot of people, we have a lot of pity parties for ourselves. And but to take that feeling of pity and to wield it in a more objective sense with the realization that we're non-entities. The people around us are non-entities. We are going to die. They are going to die. And to have and to develop an objective sense of pity, to develop empathy for them. So I guess to transform pity into a feeling of empathy might make it a bit more explainable.
That links it with the air more clearly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna just, I've got it all set up here. That's to deal with the devolving part of air, the devolutionary part of air. This exercise, it's just a short one. I thought I had it set up. Let's see if I can do it again. I'm not sure what's happening, why it's not here. You're just seeing me on the screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, here it is. Share it. Okay. So digesting active elements. So this is the evolutionary, the opposite, elements from the air. And this is found in Gurdjieff's early talks, 1914 to 1931. And, this is using his exact words with just a tiny bit of editing.
The tempo of ordinary life before doing this exercise by spending 15 minutes relaxing as deeply as you can. Now repeat the following out loud or in your mind. I am now about to begin this exercise, which I have been fortunate enough to learn from Mr. Gurdjieff, and which will enable me, with the aid of conscious labor, to coat higher bodies in myself from active elements in the air I breathe. And bring your whole attention to this breathing exercise. Breathe normally and do not alter the natural rhythm of your breathing. Breathe in I and breathe out am with all three parts. Breathe in I and breathe out am with mind, body, and feelings. Breathe in I and breathe out am with your cerebral hemispheres, cerebellum and spine, and solar plexus. And when breathing out, imagine a part of the air stays in you and flows to the corresponding place, where it flows, how it flows, That is its own business. You must only feel that a part remains in you. Now do not hold your breath. Just breathe in and out naturally. And when breathing out, imagine something flows out like a gray fog. And take a corresponding posture that mobilizes an inner tension and causes your centers to work together for this aim. Doing this exercise properly with conscious labor and breathing this small property into your blood will make big results possible. Breathing normally without altering the natural rhythm of your breath. Now repeat the following out loud or in your mind. I am now about to begin this exercise. With full attention, I will draw in my breath, saying I and sensing the whole of myself. I wish very much to do this in order that I may digest air. Breathe in I and breathe out am with all three parts. Breathe in I and breathe out am with mind, body, and feelings. Breathe in I and breathe out am with your cerebral hemispheres, cerebellum and spine, and solar plexus. Breathe in I and breathe out am, and when breathing out, imagine part of the air stays in you and flows to the corresponding place. Where it flows, how it flows, that is its own business. You must only feel that a part remains in you. Now repeat the following out loud or in your mind. I wish to keep this substance for myself. Breathe in I and breathe out am. And when breathing out, imagine something flows out like a gray fog. Breathing normally without altering the natural rhythm of your breath. Breathe in I and breathe out am with mind, body, and feelings. Breathe in I, and as you breathe out am, imagine a part stays in you and flows to the corresponding place. Breathe in I and breathe out am with mind, body, and feelings. Breathe in I, and as you breathe out am, imagine a gray fog flows out. Breathe in I and breathe out am with mind, body, and feelings. Breathe in I, and as you breathe out am, imagine a part stays in you and flows to the corresponding place. Breathe in I and breathe out am with mind, body, and feelings. Breathe in I, and as you breathe out am, imagine a gray fog flows out. Breathe in I and breathe out am with mind, body, and feelings. Breathe in I, and as you breathe out am, imagine a part stays in you and flows to the corresponding place. Breathe in I and breathe out am with mind, body, and feelings. Breathe in I, and as you breathe out am, imagine a gray fog flows out.
At any rate, I have that on the YouTube channel, the Toronto Gurdjieff group, along with some other Gurdjieffian inspired inner exercises. So I began talking about the vow that I only do this inner work in order to help my fellow human being. I grow my being, Somehow on repeat. I don't know if everyone's hearing that, but to vow to do this inner work, for ourselves. So I wish to be, I can be, I have the right to be, I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. And it shows the significance of this work, that we are not doing it to achieve enlightenment, that we are not doing it to achieve liberation, that we are doing it as an act of service to help this world, to help humanity, to help our fellow human beings. And I always like to affirm 3 lines of work. I do this work for myself. I do this work for my fellow human being. And I do this work for the planet Earth herself. And this reflects the 3 levels, World 12, World 24, and World 48. That we exist, at least partially, and maybe embryonically at the higher levels, but we are working along these 3 different lines. So it's always good to recognize that whenever we do inner work, we are doing it as an act of service, that we take a vow to do it as an act of service. So let's just do a head down to the bottom of our feet relaxation exercise. So just breathe in awareness and breathe out tension from the top of your head. Breathing in awareness and then breathing out tension from our forehead, our eyes, our nose and face, our ears and the sides of our head, our mouth and jaw, our throat and neck, our shoulders, our upper arms and elbows, our lower arms and wrists, our hands and fingers, our chest, our midriff and abdomen, our upper back and shoulder blades, our lower back, our hips and buttocks, our upper legs and knees, our lower legs and ankles, our feet and toes. And Mr. Gurdjieff says that the prerequisite for doing inner work is the state of relaxation. In my understanding, that when we hold tension in certain parts of the body, it's almost like a physical form of identification. And that in order to be mindful, we have to first let go. And we should develop the ability to relax very quickly. If you can't, it's something that should be worked on. So you can just learn to relax your body from the top of your head all the way down to the bottom of your feet. And Mr. Gurdjieff talked about relaxation as going down and sensing going up. So let's just continue with this relaxation. Breathe to the top of your head, and as you breathe out, breathe down your body and relax your body. breathing into the top of your head, and as you breathe out, breathing down and relaxing your body. And doing this one more time, breathing into the top of your head, and as you breathe out, breathing down and relaxing your body. And then let's do Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. As a vessel fills with warm golden honey, fill with sensation slowly in your body, developing the ability to grow this awareness of sensation. So just become aware of the soles of your feet, and then fill with sensation into your whole feet. Then filling with sensation up through your ankles, your lower legs, up to your knees, up through your upper legs, up to your hips, up through your lower torso, your middle torso, your shoulders, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet, up through your fingers, your hands, your wrists, up through your lower arms, up to your elbows, upper arms, up to your shoulders, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet, all the way up now through your neck, up to the top of your head. And become aware of your body as one organic whole. Become aware of the sensation of self. And then with your body brain, with the part of your brain that exists partly in your cerebellum and down your spinal column, the sensory brain. Become aware of the sensation of air flowing in from your nostrils to your lungs and back out again. Become aware of the sensation of air as well as the movement of the various muscles involved in breathing, your diaphragm, abdominal muscles, the muscles between your ribs. Become aware of both of these processes, the sensation of air and the movement of muscles. Then become aware of your body breathing, the sensation of the flow of air, the movement of the muscles, and your whole body. Become aware of the sensation of your body breathing. And then with your head brain, with your imaginative faculty, with the ability to visualize and think, perhaps imagine that you are breathing in active elements from the air around you. Perhaps you can visualize them as sparks of light, or however you would like to. Imagine breathing in perhaps sparks of light and then breathing out the gray, foggy waste, using your head brain to imagine this. Imagine breathing in these higher active elements in the air and then breathing out the gray, foggy waste. And as you breathe in, imagine that some of this light, some of this luminosity, some of these higher particles remain inside yourself. And then as you breathe out that gray, foggy waste, imagine something remains inside. And then combine the head and the body. So the body's sensation, the sensation of air flowing in and out, the sensation of the muscles involved in breathing, your diaphragm, abdominal muscles, and the muscles between your ribs, the sensation of your whole body breathing, while imagining breathing in these higher particles. Imagine something remains and then breathing out a gray, foggy waste, combining the head brain and the body brain. And then finally, add the feeling brain. Try to become aware of something different, a feeling as opposed to a sensation, that as we breathe in, this feeling flows, this different than sensation, this feeling flows down to our solar plexus. And then as we breathe out, become aware of this feeling flowing down to our reproductive organs. Imagine that you can be aware of this if you have to. So breathing in and aware of something flowing to our solar plexus, and then breathing out and imagining it flowing down to our reproductive organs, using our feeling brain. And then again, let's put this all together. Imagine with our head brain, particles of light, breathing them in, imagining something remains, and then breathing out a gray, foggy waste. And as we do this, a visualization, sensing our body, sensing the flow of air, sensing the movement of muscles, sensing our organic body as one whole, sensing our body breathing, aware of these visual images, the light particles perhaps, the active elements in the air, breathing, imagining something remains, breathing out the gray, foggy waste while sensing our body breathing and becoming aware of feeling that comes in through the air, that airborne feeling that flows down into our abdomen, our solar plexus as we breathe in, and then as we breathe out, it flows down to our reproductive organs. That exercise that I played of the YouTube video, that's a preliminary exercise. This is a more advanced explanation of the same exercise. Consciously breathing, breathing with all three parts. And the final thing to add is the word I as we breathe in, and the word am as we breathe out. So imagining breathing in sparkles of light, being aware of the in-breath in our body, breathing in the sensation of that, aware of that, whatever it is, feeling that flows to our solar plexus as we say, breathing in the word I, and then breathing out the word am with that gray, foggy waste, the sensation of our body and the feeling going down to our reproductive organs. Putting it all together. I, as we breathe in, and then am, as we breathe out. And recognize that by doing this, we are actually accumulating the higher particles within us, necessary for the evolving element of air to continue, necessary to begin to allow us to feel those higher feelings, to experience those higher molecules, those higher levels of breath and breathing. By breathing in consciously, by doing this, we are breathing those elements into us that allow for this alchemical process, this transformation of our being to occur. And these are not hypothetical substances. This is not an imagination. We are actually breathing in real, refined particles from the air through this process. And these refined substances, particles in the air, through this process, are remaining within us and become the higher carbons that exist within us that need to meet with the lower in order to the higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle, to begin this process and help assist this process of growing our inner being. This is not a metaphor. We grow our inner being. We grow these inner bodies through inner work. It's how we develop ourselves. Breathing in I, breathing out and, breathing in I, aware with the head, with the body, and with the feelings. Breathing out and, aware with the head, the visualizations, the body, the sensations, and the feelings. Helping to grow our own being, helping us to accumulate the higher substances necessary for our own inner development and evolution. And while it is always good to begin inner work with an affirmation, and as I said last week, I'm thinking of going back and just putting that vow at the beginning of all the inner exercises that I put online, so that when we make the vow and we vow to do that, it takes on a certain resonancy, a higher quality, and we lock ourselves into that. As a hypnotist, when I work with clients, I do something similar at the subconscious mind so that they cannot misuse certain skills and things that I try to teach them at the subconscious level. And by making a vow, we are making it with our whole being, our mind, our body, and our feelings. So we vow to do this inner work, to be of service to this world, to be of service to our fellow human beings. And Mr. Gurdjieff said it's always good to finish with the collected state exercise. As the earth has an atmosphere, so too do we have an atmosphere. Normally our atmosphere is really dispersed, and we get movement and, whatever, we disperse it. So a requirement for this is to be relaxed, to be in a relaxed state when we do inner work, to be calm when we do inner work. And then to imagine drawing our atmosphere around ourselves, perhaps a meter, meter and a half. Perhaps to imagine, feel, sense that we are surrounded by a balloon or a cocoon or a sphere or an oblong shape. And he said that this atmosphere for most people has three components: one that comes from the head brain, one that comes from the body brain, and one that comes from the feeling brain. And so we can disturb it with our thoughts, disturb it with our sensations, or disturb it with our feelings. And so a calmness of mind, a calmness of body, and a calmness of feeling is required. So keep your mind, body, and feelings calm. He also said it's possible to become aware of the border of this balloon, this sphere, this atmosphere that surrounds us. So keep your thoughts, body, and feelings calm. Draw it close to you, a meter, meter and a half. Even become aware of the boundary of it. And our inner work, what we've done in a sense, although part of it's within us, we've begun that process. A part of it also exists in the atmosphere around ourselves. And so we collect the atmosphere, we keep it calm, we keep it contained. And then we breathe it into ourselves, and as we breathe out, we imagine that something remains. And Mr. Gurdjieff said after we do this, especially when we do this at home, we should stay in a quiet state and not get up and rush about. And he said we do this, and in his words, to allow the emanations to settle within ourselves, the emanations that help to grow our inner being. So become aware of your atmosphere. Keep it calm, keep it still. And I'm going to count to 3, and then just breathe it in, and then as you breathe out, imagine something remains. 1, 2, 3. Breathe it in, and then as you breathe out, imagine something remains within you. And Mr. Gurdjieff also said it's always good to end with an affirmation. So silently in your mind, repeat after me. May results of this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being, and then, just return to normal. And as he said, it's not a good idea to get up and rush off and do things after we do inner work, to allow things to settle within us. Any comments, any questions, any... And as I mentioned right at the very beginning that, I think I'm going to be looking for a few, not a lot, but a few new people who would like to join us in this meeting. It's always nice to talk to about 5 or 6 or 7 people. I don't want it to be too big, because then our icons and our images would be too small on the screen, but it would be nice to get a diversity of people. So people who may have experience with the teachings, even to people who are not that experienced with the teachings, to cover all range of possibilities so that, we can bring questions up and concerns from, wherever you are. It's nice to have someone who's just putting their toe in the teachings, who hasn't done a lot of inner work, and to have someone who's done more inner work. So Sunday mornings, Toronto at 10:30. We're now off daylight savings time, so I guess Mexico, where Karen is, it's an hour earlier, but for Ian, it's 7:30 in Portland, Oregon. And I think that there's a confusion in time. I have some people who are interested, who are in the Middle East, Egypt, and sometimes they just can't make it. They're busy. But it would be nice to just get a few more people. So just to put that in mind for those who are watching. Particularly if you're watching now and you're watching this live on YouTube, you know exactly when it's being broadcast, and it will be broadcast at this same time all the way until next October, and when we go back to daylight savings time. So this is the time it would be broadcast for the next 7.5 months. Any questions, any comments, anything? Ian, Karen, no?
The one thing I'd like to ask Allan is, sometime could you talk about how to get out from under suffering and the suffering that I'm causing myself, that I see how it's affecting my daily life, and I just don't know how to pay enough to get out of there.
Yeah. Okay. I'll have to bring back the decision exercise. It's a wonderful exercise, but as Ian knows, it involves punishment. There are ways, if you make a decision and decide to do something, and decide in the conscious state, you also have to decide to punish yourself. And for Ian, that time you did the decision exercise, it was stepping into cold water shower, something, to use as a reminding factor. But maybe I'll do that on the next meeting, because that is a very important topic. The decision exercise, how to decide to do something simple, something manageable. So perhaps, Karen, rather than focusing on all of it, to narrow it down to one specific emotion, perhaps annoyance or something like that. And
well, I see the emotion is guilt from things that happened 40 years ago, and they still affect how I relate to people. I see that more and more. I'd like to understand that better.
Okay, that's a little bit different, but yeah, maybe I'll do the decision exercise next meeting, go through it, an explanation of it. I've got a number of different versions. I mentioned earlier that I created my own version when I was asked to write it down, and in some ways I think my version is a good version, but I've got the other version. I've got the Bennett version, I've got my version. I've got a version that Fritz Peters put in one of his books. And this is a good way to begin to do inner work. And working with guilt is something slightly different. So we'll get there.
Good,
okay, thank you all for coming, and hopefully when not my connection lost and dropped or whatever, I'll find out if Facebook connected back again. That's one of the reasons I like Zoom as opposed to Skype. We lose the connection, and then you don't even have to do anything. You just sit back, and as soon as the connection is reestablished, Zoom just connects again. So I will see. Hopefully people have been watching. If not, it'll be on YouTube. Take care, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Allan.
Okay, you're welcome. Take care now.
Bye.
Bye now.